This is a Nomad Capitalist case study. I'm Andrew Henderson. We're here with Yelena Sivchev and Irena Pergamet, who work in our strategy team, creating holistic plans for our clients, and Irena, who works in the operations team, executing those plans. It's good to be with both of you, and we're going to walk through a case study of a family who lived in the United States, who lived in Florida. They had a couple of key objectives they came to us with, and actually ended up with some easier strategies than they imagined, lower cost strategies than they imagined they would be able to take advantage of when they came in. Basically, we surprised them. So walk me through this couple in Florida with their kids and what they wanted to accomplish.
Well, some of their goals included saving on taxes, moving to Europe, and also getting a second passport.
Okay. And so they were living in Florida, like this low tax state, and they came in and said, yeah, you know, we're saving a little bit, but we want to save more, basically, right?
Correct, yeah.
Okay. So goal number one, reduce our taxes, and their business was what?
They had an online business, so it's location independent, consulting business, and also they had some YouTube channels and some Amazon merch.
Amazon merch,
Yeah.
right. So one thing that jumps out to me is someone who runs a YouTube channel. We don't run ads on our YouTube channel. They did run ads, as I understand. And so what the U.S. government actually did a number of years ago was said, if you're running ads and you're hitting people in the U.S., that's a royalty tax, and that's actually taxed differently, and that's harder to offshore. I don't think they were aware of that.
That is correct. I think that is one fact that a lot of people are not aware of.
Right. And so basically, the second objective, wanting to live in Europe, kind of dovetails with that, because if you have a treaty country with the U.S., that's actually a little bit easier for royalty income, right?
Yes.
So people come in and they often think, I should live in Dubai. These people didn't want to live in Dubai. I should live in Dubai or some kind of zero tax jurisdiction. But if you have dividends, if you have royalties, it's probably going to do more harm than good, right?
Yeah, it's going to be more expensive for them.
Right. So sometimes the quote unquote higher tax jurisdiction is actually lower for a number of different reasons, which we'll talk about. So number one, save taxes.
Yes.
Consulting business / YouTube channel plus some merch. Second goal, wanted to live in Europe.
Yes, that is correct.
Tell me more about that.
Well, they were kind of discussing where to go, and we opted for Portugal because it has a somewhat favorable tax exemption, the non-habitual tax regime, and they also had some claim for citizenship by descent in Europe as well.
So we'll come back to that, but why do they want to live in Europe in particular?
Well, the lifestyle suited them. They kind of opted for that as kind of the best place for their kids to grow up, go to university, and just kind of the environment was positive for them in terms of a lot of expat communities.
Right, so they wanted the community. They didn't want to make a big culture shock difference. They thought Europe would be more familiar, and they thought the kids would be better off there, right?
Yeah.
Kids are 11, 16, and 22.
Yes.
So one's already finishing up university?
Yes.
One's about to go in, and they're saying, hey, let's just live in Europe, and we can be around our kids, send them to university ostensibly much cheaper than the U.S.?
Definitely, and the oldest one wanted to enroll in a master's course, which is also much cheaper in Europe than it is in the United States.
Okay, so they wanted to live in Europe, so we're doing that. And then the third objective was we want to have second citizenship. Why was that?
Well, first of all, to have options, to have more freedom, to have an option to just say goodbye to the United States citizenship. And then the second one is to just have more kind of freedom to live in other places.
Now, did they like the United States? Was this like, hey, we'd love to stick around, but the taxes are too crazy? Or is it like, hey, we really think Europe is better?
They really thought Europe was better, so they didn't really like the lifestyle politics in the United States anymore.
Right.
And they wanted to kind of go where they were treated best. In this case, they opted for Europe.
Right. And so they're willing to pay a little tax, but they're like, we don't want to be paying 43%.
That's correct, because in Europe, they're not going to pay zero, but it's going to be substantially less than the United States.
Okay, so you mentioned, so those are the three goals. Citizenship, living in Europe, and lowering taxes. And I think what a lot of people don't understand, Irena, you can talk to this, is people think, hey, Europe has these really high tax rates, but they don't realize how many incentives there are, especially for foreigners, come on in and we'll lower your taxes, right?
Yes, exactly. I think that in a lot of cases, obviously, Europe sounds great to all of the US people, right? So there are a lot of expat communities and everything, but the minus there is that people think that taxes are as big of a problem as it is currently in the US or Canada or Australia or somewhere like that. But there's actually like a lot of like, for example, what Yelena mentioned, NHR, non-habitual tax regime in Portugal, let's mention Switzerland, Italy, Greece, anything. So there are actually a lot of options. Ireland as well, yes, thank you. So there are actually a lot of options that would be even better than and I mean anything else really. Plus, it gives you both. It gives you freedom. I think it gives you. It's obviously again expat community. It gives you a similar kind of lifestyle, but it also gives you tax benefits.
And Malta, Cyprus, there are others as well. And if you have, again, dividend income, royalty income that's not going to be zeroed out, it could actually be higher in a place like the UAE. You can take advantage of those tax treaties and pay less on that, and then still keep the income tax in your business very, very low. So here's what basically the key things we prescribe for them. And we'll go through some of the smaller points as we go. Number one, we moved the company overseas, and then they were going to move overseas. So given that they wanted to, you said move to Portugal.
Yes.
That's a temporary thing for them, it sounds like?
Well, I mean, Portugal is a current option for them, but they might move elsewhere in the future. But for the foreseeable future, Portugal it is.
Okay, so the challenge that people don't realize with Portugal, it is not as easy as moving to the UAE, for example. How do we restructure everything that they're doing?
Well, in terms of the corporate structure, so they had a company in the United States, which they wanted to offshore. And one thing that a lot of people are not familiar with is that Europe has blacklisted jurisdictions, and the list is quite extensive.
Especially in Portugal.
Especially in Portugal, so the list can be quite extensive. So we kind of looked into what would be kind of some of the best options for them, and we opted for Malta as kind of the best jurisdiction in their situation.
So Malta has this structure where you have to like set up, like it's generally a multi-corporate structure. You'd have to have like one company that's operating, one company that's just you have to have, it's a different, more complicated structure, both because Malta's more complicated with kind of their pay a high tax rate and then we refund almost all of it. But Portugal's also complicated, more so than Italy or Ireland or Greece or the other ones that Irena mentioned, because of how they have this larger blacklist of if you're going to live in Portugal, it's harder to do your tax planning, as I know, and then you have to have there's a smaller number of companies you can have.
And that's definitely true. I mean, the non-habitual tax regime kind of sounds really good, but it's actually like a Swiss cheese. So only a couple of foreign sourced income is actually exempt. So it has to really be structured carefully. And in addition to that, there are only a couple of options that can really be kind of tax favorable in terms of corporations and corporate tax. So, for example, they could have chosen, let's say Ireland, for example, which the tax rate there is now 15% corporate tax, but they wanted to go a bit lower.
Still 12.5 on smaller companies like ours, right? Okay. Right, so they could have, and I think Malta, I think Ireland, if you're not going to live in Ireland, and even if you are going to live in Ireland, you probably don't want to necessarily have to have your entire operation in Ireland. One thing people don't realize is you may not want to have your entire company anywhere. But for their case, okay, Malta works for Portugal. There's other options around. There's Bulgaria. There's different options. Yeah. Malta is a bit more confusing. And they also, as I understand, had to kind of prove, hey, we're working in Portugal, but other people are working somewhere else because Portugal's kind of like, well, who's doing the work where?
Correct. That's one of the other issues that the people are often not aware of, that is permanent establishment rules. Namely in Portugal, they are kind of strict. They are similar to other European countries where you cannot actually be employed by that company. So you can be an owner of your company, but not be employed and get a salary, because Portugal would see that as if if the company is having a permanent establishment.
Correct. Right. And so people don't realize, hey, if they would have stayed in the United States and set up their company somewhere else, that company would still be taxed to the United States. It's not that easy just to set up the company in Panama or something. Yeah. So what's going to be their net tax rate, all in all, in this business as they leave the U.S.? They're still U.S. citizens. That does follow them. What's the tax rate as U.S.?
As the United States, they're paying around 1.1 million right now in the United States.
So they're paying 1.1 million on 6 million in revenue, and how much in profit? Like 3 million or something like that?
Yeah, like 3 million.
Okay. What's that going to go down to now that they're in Portugal with this whole structure?
Well, Malta is essentially, it's going to be only 5% tax.
So 150,000 on the Malta side.
So yeah, essentially they will save around 800,000.
Because they're still going to have to pay something a little bit extra to the U.S.
Correct. Yeah.
So it's going to be a lot less, but I think we said $750,000 or $800,000 in savings. A chunk of what's left goes to the U.S. and a chunk of what goes to Malta. So there's like a minimum they have to pay in the U.S. given their situation, and then that gets credited. Malta, what they pay in Malta gets credited.
Correct. Yeah.
So they're saving $750,000 a year.
Yes.
And every 750 grand counts, as we know. Now, they chose to move to Portugal. So how are they getting into Portugal?
So because they actually wanted to live in Portugal, spend time there full time, we opted for the self-sufficient visa in Portugal, which requires them to show proof of income, and they have to actually spend time
Hey, we
there.
make $3 million a year, right?
Yeah.
So different than the golden visa. People hear, oh, golden visa is going away in Portugal, other countries. But if you wanted to live there, and I've seen this in my own situation, if you actually want to live in a country, making a big investment isn't always required.
That is correct, yeah. Although, I mean, in that case, you have to commit your time in that country in order to maintain the residence. So it's always either money or time.
Money or time is the issue. And then, of course, when you spend the time in most countries, but especially in Europe, now you are in the tax net, and so that's why we need the different planning. I think we had like 3 different tax memoranda. People don't often realize we need documents from proper tax lawyers that says, like, here's how you do it, here's the steps, right?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, people sometimes when they do it on their own, they do it without the memos, and then when they encounter some trouble or some issues, they really don't have anything to fall back onto. So they don't have any documents that could prove a tax authority wrong. So they kind of create additional issues.
We didn't do any planning in advance, basically.
Correct,
So
yeah.
there's like, well, you screwed up, and people get into. We had one guy, what was it? Like had to pay in Spain 600,000 euros or something, but not being prepared. So that's kind of the price of not planning in advance, especially in Europe.
Correct, and memos can be somewhat expensive. However, on a long-term basis, they're definitely worth it.
Like that's your insurance on saving 750,000. You're saying they're going to spend at least, I mean, probably the rest of their lives there. It sounds like, but if it's 5 years, I mean, that's almost $4 million plus whatever they reinvest that into.
Correct, yeah, and as time progresses, they're probably going to grow their business even more. So it's going to be even more in tax savings.
So we've got a family who wants to move in Europe, and they're going to take advantage of a low tax regime. I would say, now they liked Portugal, I guess. They liked the vibe there. A lot of expats are there. I've said if you make more than 2 million euros in profit, there's a better deal somewhere else than Portugal, right? Because you have that bigger blacklist that restricts your options of how you could pay less. So over 2 million euros, you're making a lifestyle decision to live in Portugal.
Yeah.
And so it's a self-sufficient visa as U.S. citizens.
Correct.
Then they're doing all the tax planning. So they're living they're moving from one country, moving to another, have a company in another. All the employees are coming with them, or how did that work?
They actually don't have employees, only
Just them.
contractors. Yeah, and just mostly them.
Anybody left in the U.S.?
No.
Because that is the kiss of death sometimes.
No, fortunately, no.
Okay. And so what were the challenges that we saw once this came to your desk on executing, setting up this multi-part corporate structure in Europe, getting that set up? Because you're the general contractor, basically, between all these different people in 3 different countries that are involved. How many people were there in total? Like 5 or 6?
5.
5. Okay. So what are the challenges that you dealt with?
Yes, absolutely. So let's start maybe with, I would say let's start with the immigration part of it, with the obviously self-sufficient visa. The tricky part is that we all know that Portuguese authorities are, I mean, that Portugal is not the best country in terms of...
We all know.
Yes.
Everybody, if you're reading some guy's blog or something who doesn't do this every day, he's like, oh, Portugal's the best place. All the cool kids were going to Portugal. That, this is what happened. This is why you don't just want to follow all the cool kids. But yes, we know they're a little sluggish.
Yes, let's say a little. But yes, absolutely. So the issue, I think, came where obviously if you ever heard of something about with the self-sufficient visa, the process at all starts at the embassy. The embassy part is the easy one, right? Because it's actually, it's not in Portugal, right?
I still remember 4 years ago when some guy was in Australia or something, and the Portuguese embassy, they would put you on hold for like 2 hours. We literally hired an intern for one client, and half of their day for like a month was sitting on hold, trying to get someone just to answer the blood. Like, we just want to get an appointment. And we were like hire an extra person. Like, no joke. But yeah. I think in the U.S. they're not quite as inefficient.
So I think that part came quite easy. Obviously, there were a couple of documents to have prepared and so on, which was not that difficult, obviously, because they were still in the U.S. The trickiest part was when they actually came to Portugal to get the biometrics appointment. That was the trickiest part, because now you're dealing with the bureaucracy and everything there. So I would say that the trickiest part, when obviously, and I will talk about that as well a bit later when we move on with the immigration part, is the documents collection. Everybody thinks it's very easy. And we come across that so many times that they say, well, why do you need this long? Why do you need a month?
This is a question that a lot of Americans ask, and I get it. By the way, you see me, I get frustrated in another country. I mean, it's easy to get frustrated when you're going to some other country when things don't work quite the same. The payoff is you're saving $750,000 a year. You're also going to reduce your cost of living by a lot.
Yeah.
But Americans are like, why do you need this? That is kind of a thing that we do. Like, what is this important for? It's like, listen, just do you want to save 750 grand or not?
Yes, and I think that might be the issue. You actually need to see an end goal to see, okay, this paid off. For some people do not really understand what are some of the benefits they will get at the end of it.
And it is bureaucracy. It's no doubt sometimes kind of stupid, but obviously we'll get to at the end how this family, they're loving it, and they're going to reinvest that $750, and they're going to make more. They're going to, save money on university, save money on cost of living, eat healthier food, et cetera, et cetera. So the first challenge was collecting documents, getting embassy appointments.
Yes, and of course, before that, just to add that obviously since one of their kids was actually 22 years old, we had to enroll them into university before the actual appointment at the embassy.
Right. Every country is different in terms of who qualifies as a dependent.
Exactly. So in Portugal, actually, obviously the younger children were actually completely financially dependent on them,
right.
So they were not a problem of going just as dependents. But with the kid that was actually 22 years old, we have to enroll him in the university before the actual visa is approved. And obviously we helped him with all of that. We actually provide him with the list of the universities that would fit his needs, what he wanted. Obviously there is a language barrier as well, so obviously a lot of people want the English speaking.
There are a lot of schools in Europe that are an English curriculum, right?
Yes.
Yeah.
Exactly. So obviously we were working with them on finding the best university for them, and after that we helped them with the enrollment part and so on. So again, just to come back, that the most trickiest part after that was actually in Portugal. Now, for the main applicant, usually getting the visa, especially in Portugal, is not that much of an issue, but for the rest of them,
it's easy to get approved.
Yes.
But the process almost requires someone to babysit it, unless you want to. If you're making $3 million a year, you do not want to be babysitting this process.
Exactly. Yes. So when you go to Portugal, you go and take your biometrics, right? And everything is okay. They say, well, okay, we now have the paperwork ready. That's it. 2 months later, there's still nothing. And I think that we all seen, if you didn't, there is, the internet is just full of it, right?
It's becoming a bigger issue now, yes.
Yes. I think now more than ever. And, when you go there, you see, I've been waiting for my application for I don't know how long.
You need someone to sit on them, is what you're saying.
Exactly.
Someone needs to be there making the call almost like on an ongoing basis.
Exactly.
The lawyers in this country, one thing I see with these lawyers, they're all like, we've found over the last dozen years the best ones that you can find, but they still talk in too much like it shouldn't be a problem. And I'm like, it's going to be a problem unless you manage it. And so if I'm making $3 million, I don't want to manage it. The lawyer's not going to manage it for me. So that's where you're coming in and being like, let's get it moving here.
Exactly. I think that they probably all know us there actually in Portugal, because we are actually following up every single day to ask for an update. So when they have someone sitting on their back, let's say it like that, they're like, oh, okay, let's just get it done.
How much faster do they tell you, if you know, how much faster is it getting done potentially by sitting on them versus just the lawyer is like, hey, okay, sera.
I think that I would say maybe approximately, let's say that with the lawyers, it takes approximately 2 months to actually get your card, residence card in your hand. With us, I would say maybe half a month, but...
A couple weeks.
Yes, couple of weeks.
So you're saving 4 to 6 weeks maybe.
Something like that, yes. But I think that they're sick and tired of us there, and then they're trying just to get the residency cards issued as soon as possible, and yeah.
And then for the self-sufficient, they have to rent a property. So walk me through how they did that
Yes.
Christopher and his people.
Absolutely. So obviously, before the embassy, actually, you actually need to get the rental agreement before
Or purchase.
Yes, or purchase, of course. Yes, before the actual appointment at the embassy. Now they wanted to purchase something as well, but they wanted to actually see the properties and then decide what they want. And for the 22-year-old child, they also wanted to have something rented out for him. So this would work perfectly for them.
So they'll get it for theirs, and then eventually they'll move out and they'll buy something.
Yes,
we do buy properties sight unseen for people. I've done that.
Yes.
But I think especially in Europe, you want to go and like experience it. Make sure you're buying in the right neighborhood. You like it.
Agreed. And they will either way, travel there for the biometrics. So why not just take that opportunity to have, the on tour, to have the tour there. But beforehand, the renting part we did completely, obviously remotely. And our real estate team sent them, obviously it goes on asking for the wishes, asking for some goals, what they want, and our real estate team came back with, with some options for them.
Do you know how much it cost? What was the rental price?
I think it was approximately around 1,500 euros.
Is it for a house or what was it?
It was a bigger apartment, but I think that it had approximately 5 bedrooms or so.
Wow.
So it was quite big. But if you look at it compared to the US or anywhere else, it's cheap, right? Especially now with inflation and everything.
Right.
That would be one of the cheapest ones. But we also organized that the interesting part as well, that we also tried to organize the virtual property tour for them, which was very nice, and that's how actually they got to decide on which apartment they want to rent. Obviously after that, the apartment, they were actually physically in Portugal. We did as well the kind of on the ground tour.
Right.
And yes, they decided to purchase a house there, and that's what actually we did.
So here's the good news is Golden Visa is gone now, but even if you had the Golden Visa, you're going to have to put out $350, $500, whatever. Before you don't have to make that embassy appointment. You don't have to rent the property, but to save that amount of investment when you don't entirely know where to put it, this is what you've got to take these extra steps, and so it's good to have the support.
And sorry, let's not forget about the timeline in terms of Portugal Golden Visa and visa.
It's become a problem, yeah.
Yes.
So the self-sufficient is faster now.
Yes.
Right. So they set up their structure in Europe. They're paying 5% plus they're topping up a couple extra percentage points in the US. And so they said, hey, listen, we want to have, and there's actually kind of a bonus passport, as I understand we got them. They want second citizenship. Tell me again what they expected to gain from that.
Well, for the second citizenship, they wanted obviously freedom. They wanted to have more options.
Freedom for what?
Freedom just to travel around, freedom from the United States also, so not to be stuck in one country. Obviously, with COVID, everything that happened, people are kind of worried that it might happen again as well, kind of restriction of movement. Then also they wanted additional options for their kids, not just for themselves. And they just wanted to have kind of options to exit the United States.
They wanted to be able to leave, right? So if your goal is, I want to live in Europe for 5 years, save a bunch of money in taxes as an adventure, come back with those income tax savings, you could do that, 3.75 million plus whatever they make on that. It's not a bad thing for an adventure.
Yeah.
Save money in your kid's school. Maybe you get Portuguese citizenship, and that if you're there 5-6 years, you can get a passport that way. But they wanted the opportunity because they knew they wanted to leave full time, at least one of them, just to get the second passport and be able to sever the U.S. tie.
No, I was going to say that they actually were kind of committed to not coming back to the United States for the foreseeable future. So they also kind of discussed maybe potentially both of them severing ties with the United States, but later on kind of opted for only one of them to do that.
It's very rare. I've always told people, why do both, if you have a married couple, and they're both American, they're all Americans, right? Now, no one had any other citizenships except for the ones we found, right?
Yeah.
Okay. You don't generally need to both get out. Now, if one of them gets out, that U.S. top-up tax on Malta will no longer apply, correct?
That is correct, yeah.
So basically they're going to save an extra, 100 and something thousand a year if one of them leaves, the owner. Okay.
Additional 5.5.
And sometimes like with a married couple, it's like, oh, she was born in Canada, so she's the Canadian, so it's easier for her to renounce. He's just American, like, what's he going to be? Right. So do they want citizenship by investment? Is that what they came asking for?
Well, they were open to a lot of options. They weren't really stuck on one or the other. What they didn't want to do is just wait for a number of years to get a passport. They wanted to get it in a matter of a year, maximum year and a half, just at least one.
So here's where I think like renouncing your citizenship isn't really all about taxes because, especially if you got a family, like your kids want to go back to the U.S. If the kids aren't renouncing and we determine one of the spouses won't renounce. So one person's renouncing. Depending on what passport they have, they may or may not be able to easily go back to the U.S. But if you make $3 million, they're paying 100 and some thousand. Like, it's not the end. If you really love the U.S., you're just going to pay the 100 and some thousand.
Yeah.
The issue is the complexity with this multi-part corporate structure, and you're in all these different places. It becomes more expensive to file that tax return. There's bank accounts. There's a lot of things to do.
And that's correct. And also, in addition to that, there's certain income that the United States will exempt if you're living outside of the United States. But the issue is that Portugal will not exempt that income. So, for example, with the United States, you could exempt your salary, but Portugal will tax it. Portugal would exempt dividends, but the United States will tax those dividends. So it's kind of a tax-neutral situation in a way in that personal income tax regard.
So if you're an American, you still have some restrictions also. People ask, like, I got a couple of pied-à-terres around the world where we, have business interests. And that was kind of a side effect of being out of the U.S. system, where now you have more control over your company's funds that you don't have as an American. So even if the taxes aren't as low, you're kind of restricted as to what you can do with that money outside of the business.
Correct, yeah.
Which if you just are piling up cash as they are, it's not as effective. Okay, so they came and you prescribed St. Kitts and Nevis citizenship. It's one of the 5. It gives them, if they ever wanted to move there, it's a tax-free country, but that's not going to help them living in Portugal or the U.S. Why St. Kitts, and why for everybody?
Well, first of all, they wanted options for their kids as well. So they wanted them to be included in every kind of step of the plan, especially citizenship. At the time when they came to us, St. Kitts had this amazing option where they had the reduced price of $150,000 for a family up to 4 people. And then for an additional 5th person, it's 160.
It's 10 grand each in St. Kitts.
Correct.
That's a good little, when we get these really big families, we had like families of 11 or something, and St. Kitts it's a cheaper for each person.
Yeah, that was kind of the option at that time. So, and also St. Kitts is one of the best passports in the Caribbean area in terms
the best of the 5, yeah.
Yeah, in terms of visa-free countries. And a tax haven, and it's crypto-friendly. So a lot of those things kind of factored in us deciding that was the best option for them.
Are they in crypto also?
They're dabbling a bit in crypto.
That's one thing that as U.S. citizens would be an issue.
Yeah.
Not really much relief from that in Portugal. Okay, so they chose St. Kitts and Nevis, and they all wanted to do it. Because sometimes you'll have a case where it's just like, all right, I'm the dad, I want to renounce. Right? You can't renounce for your kids, right? And you can't. Most people, you shouldn't have your wife renounce, or vice versa. So sometimes it'll just be like, hey, listen, I'm the only one who wants it, but you're saying, hey, it's the same price. Now you'll say, we had to collect all the documents for St. Kitts, and that's for 5 people. That's a schlep.
Well, yeah. I think it would be easier if it was only him, but yes, of course.
You do pay extra per person on the processing side, but not the donation side.
Yes, that's true. And plus on the other side, yes, it's more, of course, complicated to collect documents for 5 different people, but the main applicant is always the one that you're focusing the most, because you really need to provide all the proof of funds documents, where is the money coming from, and so on. So it's much or less, I wouldn't call it the same, of course not, but that's a very hard process really in collecting all of the documents. And if you had anyone that went through the process, they would say that it's awful. And
I've been through it, and the first time I ever tried it, the second time I ever tried it, I just gave up and said, I'm too busy running my business to be bothered with this. And that's why I developed our team to be like, let's focus on Westerners. And let's have a notary in Miami. Let's have people in Miami. Let's have someone who comes to your house if possible and fingerprints. How do we make it easy? Because I've seen multiple people try it and just fall flat on their face. Again, if you're a Westerner, you're not used to this level of bureaucracy.
Yes, exactly. And I think that especially something that is, let me say that, for example, we need to order the FBI report. The validity of the FBI report, for example,
it's tight.
It's 3 months.
I've always said you're threading the needle, where you need this document, you got to order it, and you really have to thread the needle on timing sometimes. Where if someone's just handling it on their own, it's like, I got this, but now that's gone.
And ordering your FBI report, getting the fingerprints taken, the apostille, the federal apostille currently takes approximately a month. With the shipping time and with everything, you are left with half of a month.
You got a couple of weeks where you got to be ready to go.
Yes, and if the shipment is delayed, if something happens, and of course, with us it never happened, thankfully. But if you're doing it on your own, well, there are other documents that would expire in the meantime, so you have to do it all over again.
I've sat there with a stack of documents this thing, I can tell you.
Yes.
So this family of 5, $160,000 donation. They obviously paid some extra fees. With us, it's just, hey, here's the entire fee for us to manage the process and then that includes government processing fees, passport issuance fees, kind of one chunk. So you kind of know what you're getting into. It bothers me, I think, that most companies don't offer it that way. It's like, hey, here's our fee. It's like, I don't care what your fee is. I care what I'm paying.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. And especially the documents part, I think that we all know you might not have an idea of how much that will cost. But the documents for 5 people.
I think I spent $15,000 last time.
Exactly.
Online.
And can you imagine the price for 5 people?
Well, that's the one common misconception that we get in the first part of the process, where people don't really understand how complex that is and what does that involve, and they often kind of underestimate that part.
And plus, if you have you have 5 different people here, everyone born in a different state, and
right.
you have to apostille that document in each different state. I mean, if you drive all through the U.S., that wouldn't cost.
And then if you're Canadian, it's even more expensive, as I understand.
Yes,
they've got their own weird requirements.
Yes.
But it's one of those things where everything is easy and nothing is easy. I mean, if you're an American with a clean criminal record and you haven't been sued by 100 people, I mean, you're probably going to be approved. And your money's clean, of course. Like, you're going to be improved by these Caribbean passports, but the documents that you need to get are difficult. So how long did it take to get the passport? Because I hear stories, 18 months, some of these people that aren't, not with us, but...
No, thankfully not. We took approximately 2 months to collect all the documents, and after that it took them 3 months to get the final approval. So all in all, 5 months since they started.
And then it takes a couple of weeks to print out and issue a passport.
That was all together with that 3 months.
Because keep in mind, like, you can be a citizen of a country and not have a passport. People don't understand that.
St. Kitts is one of the best ones in that area, really. Yeah, I mean, apart from being the best passport out of the 5, it really has the processing time is really fast.
They're more efficient,
yes.
But it's a little more expensive.
Yes.
But the travel's a little better. It's like a total tax-free versus like Antigua, and they were a little bit less restrictive. So okay. So now the plan was, and then they haven't done it yet, but because I think people sometimes want to get the passport. Again, they're willing to overpay a little bit on the tax side for a while, just to kind of say, let me travel. Are they going to switch the residents over to the St. Kitts passport in Portugal once they get it? Because they applied as Americans, but they can flip it.
Yes, they actually submitted the application with the U.S. passport because of
you want to get started. You don't want to waste. You're doing it in parallel.
Exactly. But after you get the residency with the U.S. passport, it's very easy to after that switch it. I mean, very easy for us, obviously, with the connections and with everything, to just switch it to the St. Kitts passport. Now they obviously didn't know whether we was just switch it to the St. Kitts for obviously the client who will renounce. Yes, for him it would be 100% that we will switch it. However, for the rest of the family, they were still thinking about it. But since in the future there may be a possibility for the wife, for example, renouncing, like they mentioned that was their idea at the beginning. I think being on a safe side, it's easier to just switch for all of them.
And the question is sometimes it's like, if one renounces and one doesn't, it's like, are you going to have that one non-U.S. person own more of the assets? That's a personal conversation in your relationship of like, do I want my spouse to own all this stuff? Like, if you're one U.S. and one non-U.S. and you're living in Portugal and you have Bitcoin that's going up, from a tax perspective, much better for the non-U.S. person to own it. But then the U.S., what's the trust factor, right?
Yeah, I mean, the trust is always important there, whether among spouses or business partners. Obviously, for tax purposes, we can always kind of go back to what is the best option. But again, at the end, it kind of comes down to the trust.
So they got that passport. That's pretty easy. So now they have the freedom to get out. They have the freedom for the spouse that owns the business. And actually, even if they just want to own the business as partners, U.S. and non-U.S., they get some relief on that U.S. top-up tax. Yeah. So, you could still do that 50-50. But then you still have some of the restrictions.
Yeah.
So it depends on how far you want to go with it in terms of how do you switch it. But so now they have that passport. He's in the process of exploring, just making sure he feels comfortable traveling as a St. Kitts citizen. Plans to renounce, simplify the life. But we found they actually qualify for an even better passport, which eliminates the need for even some of the residence work you did long term.
Yeah, when talking about citizenships, one of the kind of most common things and questions that we like to ask is whether you have ancestors from other countries. And in their case, they did have, namely the husband had from on the French side. So his grandmother was French, and he had the option of obtaining the French passport. Now, that is not only an excellent passport in terms of visa-free travel, but also that would kind of eliminate, for him at least, and some of his children, the need for having a self-sufficient visa in Portugal.
Right. So if I'm a citizen of an EU country, France is one of those. If I'm French, I could just move to Portugal. It's not quite as not quite the same as saying I'm moving from California to Florida, but you can kind of think of it that way if you're an American, right? And so I don't have to really, I just show up and go through the registration process. So they got the self-sufficient visa in Portugal. Again, we're doing things in parallel. They want to get moving. They want to go and do it now. But when it comes time to renew, they won't really have to actually do that. They'll just say, hey, now we're here as French, right?
Correct. They don't need to renew the residence in Portugal. They can simply register as EU citizens at that point. And long term, it doesn't even have to be Portugal. It can be any EU country.
And they can move around to any of the other ones. And some of the tax incentives come and go in some of these countries. I mean, you can go to Italy, you get 15 years. You go to Greece, you get 15 years. You go to, you know. But one of the misconceptions there is his wife is not necessarily entitled to that one right away.
Correct.
Because she's not French.
Correct.
He is, and the kids, therefore, pass down. How does that work?
Well, on the one end, she can kind of go with him.
As a spouse?
As a spouse of an EU citizen.
Or common law partner.
Correct, yeah, on a family reunification. And on the other side, I believe she has the option of getting the passport in a couple of years, even if she's not living there.
Isn't France, and I think Italy is one of those ones where if you register properly, I know you do this on your side, you can register and there's a system where then like 3 or 4 years later, without even having to live in that country, just being married to the person, you can get the passport, right? It's a little tricky, as I know.
It is a bit tricky.
But we've had it for a couple times.
Yeah, we did.
Including for some gay couples also.
Yeah.
In France, keeps coming up.
Yeah, and I think that, just to jump in here, that I believe that when you Google it, let's say that even if the client was aware, if you Google it and you see, okay, so I have a French grandmother, French citizenship by descent, obviously by the ancestral line, is only applicable with the first line. So meaning
your
that
parent.
if your parent. And that's why they thought that they're not eligible. Now, the good side here is that the grandmother and obviously their parent was still alive. So the parent could actually get citizenship, and after the parent gets it, then it's the obviously the client, then it's the wife, then it's the kids, and voila, the whole family actually gets the passport, right?
How long is that going to take for like the parent to get it? Because it's longer than citizenship by investment generally. That's why someone who's like, if they can save $100,000 a year, they can make their lives easier, they'll often go with that citizenship by investment first, while they're waiting again in parallel. How long is that? That's
why actually we decided to firstly get the obviously censorship by investment in St. Kitts, but as well to continuously to simultaneously actually work on this as well. Now I would say it takes a couple of years, unfortunately, but compared
for parent and then the kid.
Yes, but compared to, for example, Italy or anything like that, it's faster. It's much faster than, for example, again, the Italy. But the tricky part is the documentation. Now, we had cases where we managed to find, for example, the birth certificate, but the birth certificate was from, 1920s or so, and it was handwritten. It was just handwritten on a piece of paper.
People don't realize for citizenship by descent. I mean, I've 9 years now, and every year I collect some other document, and it's like, oh, we don't like that one. And I kind of eventually just kind of figured out this is not going to work. We've had people where they go and the town hall burnt down or something with their paper records. There's a lot of work that goes into these.
There is a lot of work, and that's why.
So, not always, but oftentimes.
Yes, but in obviously that's why we, for example, have the separate team that works on this, because it does.
Just citizenship by descent.
Yes, because it takes a lot of work, and it can take, if you do not do it constantly, it takes years to just collect the documents.
That's what I dealt with,
Exactly.
And so I mean, we had to call like Gary, Indiana, but anyway, so he's going to get in a couple of years. He'll be French. When's the self-sufficient visa renew? 2 years.
2 years, yeah.
So he might just renew that as, hey, we're still self-sufficient, we're still St. Kitts citizens or Americans, whatever they want to do. But then when the next renewal comes, you know what, we're French.
Yeah.
Or 4 of us are, and then here's the spouse of the French person.
And plus, just to add that if you want to, if you're a EU citizen already and you want to get residency in Portugal, in this case, you would need the property. Well, they already have the property from the D7 visa that they previously got.
Right.
So it's a plus kind of situation. No additional work there.
The other thing that's kind of cool that you were mentioning was once he's the one expatriating from the U.S. in the future, right?
Yes.
If he expatriates as a St. Kitts and Nevis citizen, you would have to go and apply for a visa, generally where you live. So they may be a little easier to deal with in Lisbon than they would be in Barbados, which is the embassy for St. Kitts. But I mean, you're still going into the embassy, you're still filling out a form, you're still going to be interviewed. Whereas, so in the gap between expatriating as a St. Kitts citizen and later becoming French, so long as he's not rejected to try and go to the US, then he can get the French passport and skip that whole embassy process. So for someone who wants to perhaps go back to the US, now, they could make some law in the future saying if you left and you're a rich guy, I mean, to hell with all of you, we don't care where you're from. But as of now, he would be able just to hang out for a couple years and then say, hello, I'm French.
Correct.
And just go to the US with all the other French people going there.
Yeah, I mean, he wasn't really stuck on going back to the United States right at the moment.
Yeah.
So he was willing to wait a couple of years, which was honestly the best option. Because if, as you said, if he did apply for a visa, got rejected, he would have much harder time, or impossible to get back on a French passport.
Because give this, so it took him, you said 5 months for St. Kitts, which I think is pretty good, because I do see people, I've interviewed people who work with other firms, it takes them a year and a half sometimes collecting paperwork. But he could have done the Malta program. Malta citizenship is kind of a hybrid citizenship by investment, they like to call it that. You'd take about an extra year, right?
Correct.
16, 17, 18 months.
Yeah.
They could have done that, and that would have cost for a family of 5, what, 1.15, 1.2 million dollars, something like that. So they would have been out, what, an extra, I don't know, call it an extra $1 million all in, and that would have served as everything. But basically, by us finding this French passport, they saved, in exchange for him waiting to go to the US an extra year or two, he's going to save $1 million. He could have afforded the $1 million, but why would you, just to speed things up a year or two, in most cases, pay the $1 million?
Yeah, that's true. I mean, as long as it's kind of cost efficient in terms of citizenship by descent, why not do it? And also kind of it will help him achieve his goals. The same way that Malta passport would.
And French is like, it's really in your blood, you probably feel better about it, and it's perhaps taken just a wee bit more seriously, right?
Correct. I mean, it's an even kind of more legitimate reason to why you kind of renounce your US citizenship.
I mean, Maltese citizens can go to the United States, Maltese citizens can live anywhere in the European Union. It's the same situation. And that's something that if you're just in such a hurry, but that's what we found out was, I mean, hey, why would you even consider doing that in your particular case when you're happy to spend a little bit of extra money for that 1 year that you're US? Then you'll renounce as St. Kitts. Then you'll spend a year or two waiting for your parent and then for you to get French. Then your kids get it. And now you're all pretty well covered. And now you're going to save the hassle of renewing maybe the second time around on the self-sufficient in Portugal.
Yeah, I mean, just investing a bit more time and kind of entrusting somebody to handle the process, they get to save the $1 million.
What else came up with? So talk to me about when they moved. You said there were some challenges in terms of like, they didn't really want asset protection. They were happy to kind of keep their money. Even I think they kept some of the money in the US, which is fine. But what were some of the issues on banking that they dealt with?
So when it comes to banking, obviously, I think that they decided to keep some of actually the US accounts. Because I mean the US has a pretty good banking system. I mean not the recent things that happened, but generally yes. Now living in Portugal, we obviously decided to open one of the bank accounts in Portugal so that they can actually pay bills for the house.
For day-to-day use.
Yes, for day-to-day use.
This is a misconception. People think I'm moving to Portugal. If I have $10 million in the bank or something, I'm moving it all to Portugal. Yeah. That's not true.
No, of course not. As well, actually, they were not aware of that, but it was our recommendation to kind of move money, to keep money in different...
This is what we call planting flags, right? You have to figure out what's the best. Portugal may be the best place to live for the lifestyle. Yes. By the way, they can still get that Portugal passport if they live there 5 or 6 years and they learn Portuguese. They could be French, Portuguese, St. Kitts, and then 4 out of 5 could be American, right?
Yeah, that's true.
So they can have that. But I mean, and that's a strategy people could have used, but they, if you can get French faster, why not? But people just think like, I have to put everything in one basket.
Exactly, and don't ever do that. Trust me. I mean, it's much. Plus, when you look at the work that you actually need to put in to open a bank account somewhere, it's a lot.
In Europe, it's a lot more,
yes.
Especially at the high levels. Like if I go to UBS in Switzerland, or if I go to all the fancy banks in Monaco to get residence, I mean, they put you through the ringer. So I think it's often better in Europe to get a transactional account and just set that up there. And then if you're not American, now you can go and you can open up like the best account in Singapore. And that's going to be a lot more secure than some bank in Portugal.
Yes.
So people think, I don't want to live in Portugal. Like their banks are falling apart. Great, you're not banking there.
Exactly, that's true. And plus, just to mention, it's not just about the documents, it's about the forms. It's this set of forms.
I remember my stacked when I went through the process in Portugal. I mean, it must have been, I think you did it 3 years ago. it's like 35 pages. I didn't even know what the hell half these questions meant. I'm like, what do they want to know?
And that's why we're here. That's why we're there, to actually guide you through the process and to fill it out for you. Because if you just start doing that, it's, oh my God, it's just a hassle.
Yeah. This is the part that no one likes to talk about, is the bureaucracy and the form filling. And I could tell you, I personally, back in 2016, gave up on one process. So we have a family of 5 living in the United States, decided to move to Portugal. They like the lifestyle. Not total tax savings, partially due to the U.S. citizenship being maintained, at least temporarily, partially due to Portugal does have some restrictions. They're going to basically cut their tax exposure by about 80%, and then later it'll be cut by closer to 90% once the U.S. is out of the picture for one person. Living in Portugal, working towards citizenship. At the same time, they got residence just to get the ball rolling, getting the French citizenship underway through descent. Company is outside of Portugal, banking's outside of Portugal. What happened with the royalties from this YouTube channel?
So first of all, they were not even aware that there is a tax on that, withholding tax.
Yeah.
And the first thing, obviously, that they thought about is kind of putting the channel and kind of Amazon account in the company, and the company can be the owner of it. However, for us on our side, we kind of saw that that was actually not the ideal way to go, because even though Malta and the United States have a tax treaty, the tax treaty can be complex, it can be deemed as a treaty shopping, so the best option for them was to be in the personal name of the husband who renounced his U.S. citizenship.
As a resident of Portugal.
As a resident of Portugal, correct.
And that was able to work to reduce that, right? So if you sell a book, like I have a book, for example, on Amazon, I was able to, based on a tax residence that I already had, lower that, I think, to 0.
Yeah.
But if you're just living in Dubai or something, which is, again, another place everyone's kind of talking about Dubai now, and that's great for many people. Yeah. But, certain things are just not going to work out there, because if you have income, hey, you're getting YouTube ads from Americans, they're tagging that. They're becoming more aggressive.
Correct. I mean, and that tax in UAE is 30% withholding.
Right, so that's the top rate. And that's true if I have a dividend stock portfolio.
Yeah, and it's not only US, it's also Canada, it's also Australia sometimes. So even if you have Australian, dividends or royalties.
I've got US, Canadian, Australian, French dividends. We went through this, German dividends, all much lower if you live in Europe. So if all your income's coming from running a YouTube channel or selling a book on Amazon or maybe the merch or dividend income, capital gains are different, but the dividends and the royalties are a problem.
Yeah, in that case, for those people, UAE definitely wouldn't work unless they want to pay 30% tax.
Right, so then that's not really, it's going to be a worse deal for you.
Yeah.
If you want to leave the U.S., and fine, I mean, you should go where you want to go, but I wouldn't, you think you're going to a tax-free place. So that's what they did, and you think that's, it turned out to be a pretty good result. Everyone's feeling good now?
Yes.
Good. So that's a walk through one family, and people say, oh, you can't do it with a family, right? You have to do, and they're really enjoying life in Portugal now.
They're pretty happy. Yeah. Obviously, they're saving a lot of money in taxes, reinvesting that money, and overall, I think there is also a plan for the kids to enroll in the university soon.
Yes, absolutely. At the beginning, just to add that, yes, they liked Portugal, but they also said, okay, let's test it out. Let's see if we can actually live there, and they're still living there. So. Yeah,
and I mean, again, there's other programs in Europe. What's cool about having, whether it's through Malta, if you don't have the descent, whether it's through France or whatever else descent program you have, is there are countries that are harder to move to than others as a third country national, right? So, I mean, if someone wanted to move to like the Czech Republic, I mean, that's really, they kind of cut back a lot of their residence options. But if you're an EU member citizen, now that's open to you. And so some of those countries also have tax incentives. So they have lots of opportunities there.
Yeah, I mean, they have options. Obviously, the non-habitual tax regime is for 10 years, so they would actually have to go if they don't want to pay full tax in Portugal. So at that point, after 10 years, kind of they have the European options wide open, and they can choose from those.
Whether it's Portuguese citizenship, French, whatever. Jelena and Irena, thank you. So another success story that I think shows just how intricate this can be. There's probably opportunities out there that you're not aware that you qualify for. there are probably pitfalls that perhaps have been oversimplified by folks who are trying to sell you on a particular strategy. And so if you can leverage those two together, if you can have someone help you with the process of the bureaucracy, the form filling, making sure things are moving smoothly, you'll get the result a lot faster. You'll potentially save money you don't need to spend and not buy shiny objects you don't need. And you'll end up getting things that make your life easier in the end.